Alright, this is section 3.5 in advanced geometry. Start off with a nice little proof here. Remember, been a while since we've done a proof, so the first question we ask ourselves is it dirty? And that answer is a no, because they did not give me a midpoint, bisector, or circle. So we read the given, we write the given, and then we mark the given. They're giving me that M is parallel to N, so that's given to me. Then we go up and mark it in a picture, and we mark parallel lines with arrows. Then our idea is to look at what we want to prove. Angle 1 is the same as angle 7. These are not any kind of angles that we know about. They're not vertical angles, linear pair, corresponding angles, alternate interior angles, consecutive interior angles. So here's what we do. Let's pick on one of them. Let's pick on angle 1. Okay? You can pick on angle 7 if you want to, but the idea is just pick on one of them. And let's write something down that just has to be the same as angle 1. And the thing is, you got options, right? You should know that angle 1 and angle 3, which are vertical angles, should be the same. Or angle 1 and angle 5 could be the same. Since we have these parallel lines, our corresponding angles will be equal. So it doesn't really matter which way you go, but why don't we go with our good buddy, angle 1 being the same as angle 3. Reason, those are vertical angles, and the vertical angle theorem says they'll be the same. So then we mark those. If you write it in your proof, excuse me, if you write it in your proof, it should be marked in your picture. So whoop-de-doo, I said 1's the same as 3. Remember, the goal is to get from 1 to 7. So we said something about 1, we're trying to get to 7, but on our little journey here, we brought 3 into our little path. So let's look at 3, and let's look at 7 and be like, oh, well, hey, dude, those are those new kind of angles. They're corresponding angles. So since I have these parallel lines, I should know that angle 3 is the same as angle 7, because parallel lines implies that my corresponding angles will be congruent. And then we mark it. Since 3's got one arc mark, angle 7 will get the same amount of arc marks. Awesome. Now look back at what we want to prove. We want to prove 1 the same as 7. They are marked the same in my picture. That means that something's supposed to cross out in my proof, which is angle 3's. So angle 1 is congruent to angle 7. And that was called, again, the transitive property of congruence, when you cross out what's in common and write the leftovers congruent to each other. So let's do it again. My T-chart disappeared for some reason, but it's not dirty. Let's read the given, write the given, mark the given. Again, they're giving me parallel lines. We want to prove angle 6 the same as angle 4. Whoa. 6 and 4, those are alternate interior angles. But the thing is, we don't really know anything about them yet. We're trying to prove that they're the same. So if they give me parallel lines, we're trying to prove that they're the same. Like, we don't have a justification yet. So here's what we'll do. Let's pick on one of them. Right? Let's pick on angle 6. Right? So if I pick on angle 6, which guy just has to be the same as angle 6? Well, we could go to 8 if we want to, because those are vertical angles. Or we could go to 2 if we want to, because 6 and 2 are corresponding angles, and I have parallel lines. So it doesn't matter. Let's just stay familiar and go with vertical angles first. And vertical angle theorem justifies that. And we mark it. Boom, boom. And remember, we're trying to get to 4. Like, we look back at what we want to prove. We're trying to get to 4. I started at 6. I went to 8. Look at 8 and 4. Oh, those are corresponding angles. And since I have these parallel lines, they'll be the same. So parallel lines implies my corresponding angles congruent. Mark. And what's common is angle 8. And angle 6 is the same as angle 4 because of the transitive property of congruence. Very nice. So this is the same proof that we just did. In proof 2 above, what was given to you? Well, they gave me this, and in 2 words, that's parallel lines. What kind of angles did we prove something about? Angle 6 and angle 4 are the type of angles. Those are alternate interior angles, and we'll abbreviate that, alternate interior angles. And what did we prove about those two? We proved that they were congruent to each other. So congratulations, We just proved our very first theorem. We proved that if we were given parallel lines, then alternate interior angles should be congruent. Anytime we come across that now, that's what the whole point of a proof is, guys. The whole point of a proof is, hey, if in any situation you're given parallel lines, we've proven that alternate interior angles are congruent. So now, from here on out, we know that if we have parallel lines, that will imply that my alternate interior angles should be congruent. Sweet. And here's a bunch more theorems that we can use in proofs that we're not going to go through and prove every single one of them, but you got to trust me that they're true. If we're given parallel lines, then consecutive interior angles will be supplementary, meaning they'll add up to 180. So they were given me parallel lines, so that's what we start with. Parallel lines will imply that my consecutive, which we'll abbreviate like that, interior angles are supplementary, SUPP, so nice and abbreviated. If we have parallel lines given to us, that means that consecutive interior angles should add up to 180 degrees. And then check this guy out. If we're given corresponding angles congruent, then we have parallel lines. So when we abbreviate that, what they give me comes first, corresponding angles congruent will imply that we have parallel lines. And whoa, people were like, whoa, that is backwards from what we said over and over and over again in class. Which is true, that is backwards, because that's the converse of what we switch the hypothesis and the conclusion around. And here's what it means, right? If I'm given corresponding angles that are congruent, so pretend this is 70 degrees and that's 70 degrees, didn't they give me corresponding angles congruent? That means that these two lines right here are parallel to each other. So it works both ways. And then likewise with all of these, if we are given alternate interior angles congruent, that implies that we have parallel lines. So pretend you didn't know that guy, but you did know this guy. They gave you alternate interior angles congruent. That implies that you have parallel lines. And lastly, if we had consecutive interior angles supplementary, that will imply that we have parallel lines. So many different types of justifications we could use. When we get to the backside here, they say find x so that L is parallel to M. Right, they're not giving me parallel lines. They're asking me to prove that I have parallel lines. And check these guys out. These are the ones that help me prove that I have parallel lines, right? It's the ones where parallel lines comes last in our little statement. So got to realize what kind of angles are these two. These are corresponding angles. They're both to the left of the transversal and above their indicated line. And if I had corresponding angles congruent, that would prove that I had parallel lines. So our job is to force these guys to be the same, meaning set them equal to each other. So 5x minus 5 should equal 6x minus 20. And now let's solve for x. So subtract 5x and get minus 5 equals x minus 20. Add 20 to both sides, and x would equal 15. If x was 15, that would force these corresponding angles to be congruent, which would then prove that those lines are parallel. So to justify, we forced our corresponding angles to be congruent. And that implies that those two lines, in this case L and M, are parallel. Pay attention how many times I don't put the L in the word lines. It happens to me like every time. Corresponding angles congruent implies parallel lines. So in this guy, again, we got to realize, well, what kind of angles these are? These are alternate interior angles. They're on alternate sides of this transversal in between the two lines. So we want them to be congruent. But don't get in a bad habit of just thinking every time you get two expressions, you just set them equal to each other. It doesn't work that way. So subtract 4x from both sides, divide by 2, and x equals 10. And that would mean that we forced our, if x was 10, our alternate interior angles would be congruent. And that would imply that we have parallel lines. Hey, I didn't do it. Here again, these are alternate interior angles. Remember, this one's 90, and we're trying to prove those guys congruent, so we want these to be equal to each other. So 90 could equal 3x plus 15, and then subtract 15 from both sides, and divide by 3. So x equals 25, and again, that's our alternate interior angles being congruent, implying that we'd have parallel lines. I did it that time. Yay. So, number 4 here, these are consecutive interior angles. And remember, we don't want them to be congruent. We want them to be supplementary. So I'm going to say my 9x plus 1 plus 116, which is really plus 117, I just combined like terms, needs to add together to equal 180, because these are consecutive interior angles. So then subtract 117 from both sides. Go away. 9x equals 63. Divide by 9, and x would equal 7. And we had consecutive interior angles supplementary, and that implied that I had parallel lines. So that's the gist of these 6 problems. We can skip 5 and 6, same concept. Here, give the information to justify correctly. So now we put everything in the hat, right? All our justifications, and it's all about what they give you. Here they give me parallel lines, and whatever they give you, you need to go mark in the picture. So boom, boom. We only mark the given in these. These are one-step justifications. Here's some given information. They made a conclusion. Our job is to write the justification down. So they gave me parallel lines. I marked it in the picture. Then they're talking about angle 5 and 7, just showing you where they're at. You need to realize what kind of angles are they. Oh, those are corresponding angles. So you really have two choices when it comes to corresponding angles. You could say parallel lines implies corresponding angles congruent, or corresponding angles congruent implies parallel lines. And the way I like to say it is, do we want to use the one about corresponding angles that starts with parallel lines or ends with parallel lines? And since they gave me parallel lines, you use what they gave you. You want to use the justification that starts with parallel lines. We have parallel lines, and that means that my corresponding angles will be congruent to each other. In number 8 here, they're giving me angle 2 is congruent to angle 6. So remember, you only mark your given, right? That's what they gave me. And aren't those alternate interior angles that are congruent to each other? So that implies that we should have parallel lines, right? Notice the parallel lines comes last. So these are alternate interior angles that are congruent. Boom, right? And that means that I have parallel lines. So we use the one that ended with parallel lines. Now, what I'd advise you against is trying to just realize where are the parallel lines. Is it at the beginning or is it at the end? For future purposes, realize what did they give you? They gave you alternate interior angles congruent. So that's why we started with alternate interior angles congruent. So let's do that again here. Angle 6 and angle 7 are supplementary. Realize in the picture what kind of angles they are. They are consecutive interior angles, and they are supplementary. There's no way to mark that, right? We just don't know how to mark. These two are supposed to add together to be 180, so there's nothing to mark. Remember, you only mark your given. But don't we have consecutive interior angles supplementary given to us, and that implies that those lines should be parallel. So on 10, they give me parallel lines, so we mark that in the picture. Angle 3 and angle 7, those are alternate interior angles, so since they gave me parallel lines, I will use the justification about alternate interior angles that starts with parallel lines. And don't forget congruent at the end. That little guy gets left off. If you have parallel lines, that implies that alternate interior angles are congruent. Why don't you pause the video and try the last two on your own. Just give it a pause and see if you can get those justified. So on number 11, you should have had corresponding angles congruent implies parallel lines. I did it again. And mark the given. And on 12, they gave you parallel lines, and that will imply that angle 2 and angle 3, which are consecutive interior angles, should be supplementary. So your homework is all on a practice sheet, or sorry, all on a printed out sheet. It's homework 3-5. Let me know if you have any questions, and